There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Cameron Chronicles. I'm your co-host, Alex Jackson, alongside my other co-host, Max Rego. No guests on today, but we have reached the end of the season now, so this will be a bit of a reflection on the regular season for Duke and what's lying ahead with their first ACC tournament game tomorrow, and then what lies ahead with March Madness as well. Max, you want
Yeah,
to take it away?
yeah, always good to hop on. It's been a couple weeks, but yeah, I think just wrapping things up on the ACC tournament is going on. We're recording this on Wednesday night. Duke is playing obviously as the 4 seed tomorrow against Pitt in the quarterfinals. I'm actually, as we're recording this, I'm keeping tabs on North Carolina, Boston College. So yeah, I think Duke obviously 6 game win streak to end the year, playing easily its best basketball of the year, capped off by a 5 point win on the road against Carolina on Saturday. I was there along with Jake Piazza. It was a really impressive close to the game, 6-0 run to finish. Overall a 17-8 run to close out the game. I thought Duke was really impressive down the stretch, getting the key stops it needed to, getting the key baskets it needed to on an otherwise pretty poor shooting night, below 40% from the field. And I think that's the thing that's stood out to me is Duke hasn't played perfectly in these last 6 wins, but Notre Dame comes to mind. Struggling early against Louisville, one of easily the worst team in the conference, and one of the worst teams in the country, quite frankly. But they've figured out a way to get it done, nearly blowing it against NC State, but in the end, figuring out to get that one stop, late when they really needed it to prevent it from cut down to 2 points. They've gotten what they've needed to go on this win streak, and it's really paid off. They right now, depending on where you look, Duke is anywhere from a 5 to a 7 seed. I would lean more towards the 5 end of that spectrum. I really think this team is playing its best basketball. And I think, I don't know how much the committee values this, but I think you should value teams that are playing, that are getting better as the season goes on. I know that has not been the case, but I think that's I think it should be the case that you reward teams that are playing better as the season goes on, that are improving and gelling as a team. And I think Duke is very clearly has its pecking order. Tyrese Proctor is going to be the point guard. Jeremy Roach is going to attack off of him. Lively is going to be the rim protector, the rim runner, the lob threat. Filipowski is going to, be probably the most productive scorer. And then the guys just fill their roles off of that. So I think Duke's really figured it out. Shire's done a really good job, I think, in getting guys to buy into their roles, and also getting the team to step up in key stretches. And obviously that's also on the players, to doing their job as well. But I've been impressed, and I think, they have a good chance, I think, to make a run in Greensboro. They're the odds-on favorite right now, according to most sites you'll look at. But I think that's for a good reason. I think Miami is the second best team in the ACC right now. I think Duke is playing like the best team in the ACC, and I think that my final game, if it gets to that, on Friday night, I know Duke has to play Pitt and Miami has to play Wake Forest tomorrow. If if Duke and Miami both get by, that the semifinal game might be an ACC championship, kind of game on Friday night. So.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Just in terms of the March Madness seeding, which we won't get into too much. I just think the only thing that Duke had, I agree with everything you said about being a hot team should possibly play a factor. But I just think Duke doesn't have that many impressive wins. That's gonna definitely work against them in the seeding, even if they win the ACC tournament. Um,
Yeah.
okay, and then moving back to the UNC game, yeah, I again agree with everything you said there. It was really not a good offensive night. I think
No.
it wasn't very inspiring for the end of the season, but kind of understandable in a very hostile environment. UNC's a good defensive team. For sure, and they played well defensively that night. But things that were working for Duke in the past, I know they rely heavily on mid-range pull-ups with their guards. They were getting those looks again. They just the shots weren't falling right. They just didn't have the touch. I felt like that night, 3-point shooting necessarily wasn't always there. But it was very, I guess, cool to see them still win with their defense, kind of like their identity from from early in the season was, yeah, the offense wasn't there and the defense had always stepped up, and that kind of trend flip flopped over the course of the season. But nice to see them kind of touch back to their roots there. I thought the defense down the stretch, like you mentioned, was really, really impressive, especially on those last couple plays when they needed stops. I thought their switching was unbelievable. Everyone was in the right position. Throughout the whole game, I think the switch coverage only got blown 2 or 3 times, and other than that, I thought they handled everything really well. That's something that had burned them earlier in the season. Teams that were running a lot of screens and then switching bigs onto guards, but that didn't really affect Duke much. And they didn't foul down the stretch, which I thought was really important. So that's changed since earlier in the season. And yeah, I was overall impressed, even though it was a kind of very much down night for them offensively.
Yeah, I think one of the things this team does really well, or I guess this would be qualified as multiple things, is they do all the little things, I think, well. They're late in games, they're a relatively good free throw shooting team. They were impressive down the stretch. Filipowski was, besides that 1-and-1 that he missed, he was very solid at the line late in that game. Offensive rebounding is a huge strength. They've cut down on the turnovers. They share the ball. I know the assist numbers against NC State and Carolina weren't great, but those are two defenses that will pressure you. NC State in particular. NC State has like a very, very aggressive full court press that they play with. But this team just does all the little things, I think, well, and they've done that. They've done a much better job of that as the season's gone on, because obviously this team does not have quite the one-on-one scores that last year's team had, or even the team our freshman year, Alex, with Trey Jones being able to dump it down to Vernon Carey. But as a whole, I think it's gelling, at a level that is impressive for such a young group and obviously such a young coach. And I think, whether they're going to be a 5 seed or a 6 seed or a 7 seed, I will go on the record now. I think Duke is going to win the ACC tournament and be a 5 seed. I think if they win the ACC tournament, like, they should be pretty locked into a 5. But
you think they have any shot at a 4 if they do that?
Probably not. I think the 4 line is pretty locked in. Not locked in, but like the teams in contention are pretty locked into there. There won't be any surprises. I mean, like, you got Indiana, who's there. I think you're looking at maybe Baylor. I'm pulling up the bracket now, but I think the 4 might be pushing it a little bit. I'm looking at CBSSports.com. Jerry Palms does a really good job with that. Tennessee is kind of locked into a 4 seed. Virginia, Xavier, and Indiana. I would honestly consider Miami above Virginia, to be honest. I think Miami's just a better team on paper, but yeah, I think Duke, probably the best they can do is a 5 seed. Maybe if there's some momentum from the committee to get them to a 4 if they win the ACC tournament.
If they look at the Virginia game as a win,
yeah,
then that gets them to a 4 seed, but we all know that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know if they should do that. I mean, again,
yeah,
you are what your record says you are, but yeah, I think that 5 line is probably the max that Duke can go, and I think, say Duke loses its first game to Pitt, I think it's a 6 is probably where they'll land, because Pittsburgh's a good team. I would say they're pretty safely in. They've been on the bubble. They lost, obviously, their last 2 regular season games. Right now, they're a 9 seed on CBS, so that's pretty safe, I would say. And this was before This was updated this morning, so before they won against Georgia Tech. I mean, win against Georgia Tech does nothing for your resume, at
Yeah,
least. But a
I
loss
didn't
to
watch the game, but they didn't look. From what I read, they didn't look particularly good doing it either.
no, I mean it was a high scoring game, 89-81, but yeah, their defense was not up to par. But yeah, I think this Duke team is really gelling at the right time. And I think a 5 seed, if they're a 5 or a 6 seed, I think it's very possible for them to get a good draw and go on a run. It just depends on the matchup because I think this team is very matchup specific. In the sense that if they're able to get after a team on the offensive glass, a team that doesn't pressure you that much defensively, a lot lets Duke share the ball. A lot. I think that's where Duke could be able to make a run. But yeah, what are you looking for in the ACC tournament this week?
Yeah, I'd like to see the offense rebound. That UNC game, I think Duke, yeah, like I mentioned before, their identity is really surrounded and backed by their defense. But I think the team started hitting their stride when they found out how to play more fluid offense. So I'd like to see them return to that a little bit more. If they, I'll have a lot more content. Sorry, I'll have a lot more confidence in them if they handle Pitt easily. We know that playing away from Cameron's been difficult for them all year. So if they're able to do something like that, even if they end up losing to Miami in the game after, I'll have more confidence in them uh, heading into March Madness than if they struggle against Pitt. Even if they win struggling, I'll be a little bit more concerned knowing that they've had back-to-back bad offensive games like that. And also now we are moving into the neutral site kind of experience for Duke, which, like I mentioned, just hasn't been easy all year. So really what I'm trying to see is just them being able to play as themselves. And I think just getting those shots falling, kind of rebounding from everything that happened at UNC that didn't go well, like that having getting their touchback would be really nice to see. I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
I know we keep things professional here always, um, but put on your Duke fan hat for a second and think about Duke fans everywhere. Would you take a Duke loss in the ACC tournament if it meant that UNC was also guaranteed to lose and would miss March Madness?
Well, I think what Duke fans are thinking, probably no, I think Duke fans would want to win the ACC tournament. In talking to a lot of friends of mine around campus, I think like UNC is in the rear view. The 2 games against UNC are very important, but I think North Carolina is on the bubble. I think they have a chance. I mean, they're winning. They're up 14-13 right now against Boston College early in the game. No, I think from a Duke perspective, I think the job one is to get through the ACC tournament and build and keep building on this momentum. I think North Carolina has a chance to make a run. They're still obviously really talented. I just don't. I don't know if I see it with them, just because I don't know what their identity is, and if it takes you until March 8th to establish an identity, when you have a failsafe there, you have Armando Bacot. I just don't see they don't give the ball to him enough. Like that's the thing I noticed in both games, especially I didn't cover the first game, but I was there and I was covering the second game in Chapel Hill. Like they got him going early. They gave him a lot of touches. He didn't get the ball late in the game. I mean, I know he fouled out, but there were still times in the last 5 minutes where he could have gotten the ball. And
Leaky Black was their attempted the most shots on the team.
yeah,
I read that they announced before the game or whatever that he had played more games than anyone else at UNC in UNC history, something like that. And that was just the first game that he's ever led the team in shots taken.
yeah,
I thought that
yeah. I
was,
mean, Leakey's a good he's a very versatile defender. He's a good defender. And
but
he's a
he should
very
never be your number one shot taker.
he's a very
And
unselfish player. But there's a reason they're leaving him open. He's not a great shooter. And I think that was, yeah. I mean, obviously they're coaching staff definitely tells him to shoot it. You don't want a guy to lose confidence, but he's just inherently not a shooter. And I think that was strategy from Duke was smart. You're going to overhelp. You're going to crash on Baycott. They were doubling Baycott immediately on the dribble when he got in the post. And, it's easier to help, when you're guarding Leaky Black than if you're guarding RJ Davis. So
it's I'll be interested to see
strategy.
if other teams employ that strategy as they face UNC. I don't know what Boston College is up to right now, but assuming UNC wins that game, to see if their next opponent starts moving away and kind of shifting defense towards what Duke was able to do and shut down Baycott with double teams.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the strategy to play Carolina is doubling Baycott. I think Duke did a really good job of that. I think Shire was very very confident. He wasn't overjoyed. He wasn't overjoyed. Maybe he was inside and in that locker room. There was obviously a big celebration after the game, but in the press conference, he just seemed very confident, very satisfied with what had gone on during that game. That moment when they were down 49-45, Carolina had just ripped off a big run, hit 3 threes to give themselves a 4-point lead, and being able to get back-to-back buckets with Mitchell and then a timeout and then a lob to Lively, who just came back in. That was really the moment. Shire said that was the moment for them. They had to be able to dig down and get it going. And then that's paraphrasing a lot of what he said, but I think that was a moment for a young team in a tough environment to really show what they had, and it was impressive because they did not have their best stuff. Offensively, they had like their C+ game offensively, but they got the buckets that they needed to in the key moments. That drive by Mitchell, the lob to Lively out of a timeout, the 3 by Filipowski, the layup by Roach, and then the late stop where they, again, Shire said, like, they watched the ending of the NC State game. They watched the film of that where they gave up a bunch of threes to Jarkel Joyner and one, meaningless 3 to Terquavian Smith. But those were a lot of threes in the last 2 minutes. And he said that could happen when they're up 3 instead of up 12, and they watched that sequence, and then they, extended the defense and made it, had that work pay off in a tighter game and in a more, in a closer game, in a more intense situation. So yeah, I think they're figuring out how to win. And that's something that this team has developed as the season goes along, because you saw it, against Clemson and Miami on the road, just getting, blitzed, and Virginia in overtime, just not being able to get a, the key run, the key stop.
It's changed now.
I think that's changed. I think, this team doesn't play its best on every night. This team is not quite the offensive machine that was in town last year, with a lot of great shooters, one obviously number 1 draft pick, and one of the better bigs, one of the better centers in the country. But last year's team was number 1 in the country in adjusted offensive efficiency on KenPom. That this year's team is 63rd. And again,
that's a big improvement from where they were early in the season.
Yeah, look, they have figured out what their formula is, and that's sharing the ball, that's getting after it on the glass, and they have an identity now. So I think that's important for teams to develop as the season goes on. And I think for Duke, they've done a really good job of that. So, and I don't think, I would not say Duke's a national championship contender. I would have, I can think of 15 teams off the top of my head, maybe, that I would consider picking over Duke. But I think they are a dangerous, an interesting case where it's a name brand program, but they're a very dangerous, sneaky team that can make a mini run there and really, make some noise on the second weekend. So I think it's an interesting, situation here. So I'm excited to watch the game tomorrow. I think that's going to be a really good matchup. I really like Pitt's wings. Blake Hinson is a really good player. He had a big 3 today. But I think that matchup between Burton and Hinson, Federico had a good game today. They're a tough physical old team, And I think that's going to be a challenge for Duke. And then, that's gonna be a preview of what they're going to see night in, night out in the NCAA tournament.
Quick question. I guess not a quick question, but I guess we can use this moment to kind of reflect back in the season a little bit. So I'm wondering how
Yeah.
this season, Jon Scheyer's first season, has lived up to your expectations now that we have seen the full scale regular season.
Yeah. I mean, I think my expectations personally, I think I predicted 24-7, maybe one more win in the ACC. It's pretty darn close to what actually happened with the ending against Virginia. But, I think there was this team was going to be different from last year's team. There's obviously pressure involved with replacing Coach K, but I think Shire, got this team to buy in. Had a lot of moving parts with injuries. Only one real rotation player returning last year in Jeremy Roach, and he had just a different role. He was the first-time captain, a sole captain, and his role just was different when it was his team. He was just part of the puzzle last year, and he was a really crucial guy. I mean, he was the closer against Michigan State and Texas Tech, but he's still a cog in the machine. This year, in a lot of ways, he was the key. He was the most important player. I think he still is, in my opinion. And just managing his injury situation, Drake Whitehead's injury situation, Lively's injury situation early in the year. I think he's done a good job of getting the most out of what he's had, and that hasn't always been what he's had has not always been what you would have thought this team would have had in the summer. Drake Whitehead, getting injured, that was just didn't practice in August. Roach's toe injury, just happened against Purdue in that championship game in Portland. So I think there's been a lot of curveballs thrown, and then add in the pressure, the magnitude of this job. I think he has done a good job, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for how it's gone this year. And that's not to say I don't think even he said he hasn't coached a perfect season. He didn't coach great late against NC State. I thought there could have been some things that they did early in the year offensively. The offense looked a little stale, in my opinion, early in the year. But that was, I think, clearly it's a case where they were figuring out their offense as they went along. Tyrese Proctor is still learning the rules of college basketball, in the fall. Maybe not up until tip-off, but yeah, I think they figured it out as the season's gone on. They've grown a lot. And I think really this team is a good example of just, and this is going to sound like it's reducing, like I'm reducing them, but just they've gotten better as the season's gone on. And that's not an automatic, I mean, I think last year's team got better as the season went on. They became a more cohesive unit. They became better defensively, especially as the tournament went on. And individual guys got better, but I mean, you knew what you had with Paolo Banchero coming in. Like, you knew he was going to be 20 a night, and he improved in the margins. He became a better passer, became a better defender, became a better leader, I think, as the season went on. But that team was ready to go from the get-go. This team had a lot more room to grow, and they're not quite as good as they're not nearly as good as last year's team, but I think the improvement is clear and the progress is very evident.
Yeah, I'll give my side of that now too, and I think I hit on two big predictions this year. The first being I hit their record perfectly. I'm gonna self brag for a second. I predicted them to be 23-8. But the second part of that was that I had written a column for our preview edition about how should people be setting expectations for this, and I kind of talked about the three different paths. Could be pick up right where Coach K left off. Let's be like a top 10 seed or top 10 AP ranking every week. It could be a complete disaster, as was many coaches' first seasons. Or it could be something kind of in between where it's rocky a lot, but they eventually stumble through and end up on a high note. And I actually equated them to UNC last year a lot. I said like there's going to be turbulence, but I think that this team could really hit their stride at the end of the season and then go on to do great things in the tournament. And I'm going to self brag again for a moment because UNC ended the year last year 23-8, 15-5 in the ACC, and Duke just finished the year 23-8, 15-5 in the ACC.
14-6 in the ACC. Duke.
Sorry, 14-6. I predicted them to finish 15-5.
Right.
And so I think that there's a lot of similarities from when the state of kind of where this team is at right now. UNC ended their regular season on a 5-game win streak. Duke's on a 6-game right now. So I think that that's one thing that's providing me a lot of hope is to see that there's a team last year that surprised everyone is so similar to Duke right now. So I think like they went through kind of all the growing pains. Shire, like you mentioned, Shire had to deal with a lot of curveballs, but I think that Shire as a coach has settled down a lot, and that's caused the team to settle down a lot. I think he's found ways that he can inspire the group and kind of spark them to hold defensively or go on runs offensively. And I think that you couldn't really ask for the team to be in a better place right now if you think about where they were midway through the season. Everything was kind of looking like it was on a disaster path, but so I'm kind of pretty impressed with how things went. I did think it was going to happen like this, but it I'm glad it has played out the way it has played out.
Yeah, I think they've done overall a solid job. I think, you know, yeah, I think that's all we can kind of say. Do we want to get to some predictions for ACC tournament?
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have Duke beating Pitt tomorrow by about 10. I think it's going to beat Miami in a really close one. I think that will come down to like the last couple of possessions. And then I think Duke will have I have a feeling this might sound absurd, but I think NC State is going to make a run. I think they're going to beat Virginia Tech tonight. They're going to beat Clemson tomorrow, and then they're going to beat Virginia. I think North Carolina. Actually, I think North Carolina beats Virginia tomorrow, gets to the semis, and loses to NC State, which might be a loser leaves town game for the NCAA tournament. I think NC State clinches a berth in an at-large bid, but loses to Duke in the championship game on Saturday night at 8:30. And I think UNC comes up, I think, a hair short. I think they would have needed to get to the finals to make it. So I think Duke will win the tournament with 3 wins over Pitt, Miami, and NC State. I think UNC gets to the semis, but doesn't go any farther. Virginia loses tomorrow to UNC in the quarters, and I think obviously Miami will take care of Wake Forest tomorrow. So I think it's going to be mostly chalk holding, except for that bottom end of the bracket might get a little interesting. I think the top end is going to be Miami and Duke in the semis, and I think the bottom might be a little hectic. So I'm not sold on Virginia in the slightest. I think this is a relatively weak Virginia team.
Yeah, I'm in a very similar space to where you are. I'll start at the top half of the bracket. But we know that Wake Forest is one. I think Miami will take that, and then I think Duke beats Pitt. Duke Miami, I'm going back and forth on a lot. On one hand, I think Duke would love to kind of prove themselves to Miami once again, after where they kind of came out terrible after the first UNC game and got blown out. So I think they could, like, I'm really torn on that. I think they'll end up winning that. But it'll be really close, and I would not be surprised at all if Miami took them down. And then the bottom half of the bracket, I also agree with you. I think North Carolina is going to upset Virginia. I think UNC is just trying to prove they're fighting for a spot right now. Virginia probably could be taking their foot off the gas a little bit. And then I also think NC State beats Virginia Tech, but I have Clemson beating NC State. And then I think they're like last year. I think that Clemson, or I'm not like what's last year with Clemson, but I think an unexpected team could emerge from the ACC, and I think Clemson could be that. And I wouldn't be surprised if they took down UNC and then gave Duke a run for their money in the championship. But I this year's ACC is really just it's kind of mind-numbing how random it is. There's a lot of good teams losing to bad teams, and like games they should be blowing them out, not happening. So you never know what's going to happen. It could all be chalk. It could be completely upsets all over the place. So I'm actually, I'll be very. I'm mostly going to be following Duke just to see how they kind of continue this hot streak and play on neutral court like this. But I think everything else happening in the ACC tournament is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, agreed. I'm trying to make it down to Greensboro. It's so close. I might try and make it down for Friday's game if Duke gets there. But we'll see. I know that game looking now, it'll be at 7. So it will not be the late one, which is interesting. So yeah. I think we're ready to wrap it, right?
Yeah, that's all I got here.
Yeah. So obviously we got coverage. We got boots on the ground in Greensboro with Jonathan Leviton, Micah Hurwitz, and Sasha Ritchie covering the action. So make sure to obviously check out DukeChronicle.com and check out at Duke Basketball on Twitter for all of our coverage. We'll be covering as far as Duke goes in the ACC tournament, and we'll be covering wherever Duke gets sent in March Madness on Sunday. So I won't be covering that as much. Neither will you. I think we're both going to be on spring break. So Alex, thanks again for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks to you too. I'm glad we were able to get this in before Duke tips off tomorrow.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in.